Hi there, I'm Bonnie McCaffery, and thank you so much for coming back for another VidCast. I'm here with Wendy Butler Berns, who is the 2009 recipient of the Jewel Pierce Patterson Scholarship, and that's a scholarship that I won years ago, and that scholarship was for quilt teachers. And so Wendy won the scholarship in 2009, which is really exciting.
It was very fun.
Yeah. And so what happens when you win the scholarship?
You had to actually go through a whole application process and sending all of your materials in. But as the winner, had a chance to spend 10 days at festival and market, taking classes, taking advantage of anything that you could. Overwhelming, you sort of walked out, flew back home with your head just spinning. It was
full
great.
Of ideas and things.
Yes,
and then one of the requirements of the scholarship is that you have to teach a class kind of based on what you learned.
Combination, you can take the interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think what it was is you're learning some of those new skills and then seeing how you might be able to interpret them for your own purposes.
Right.
So there was, I had taken some wool felting and, there was texture magic. I mean, there's, all of these different techniques. So it was, going back home and then spending about 6 weeks, just trying to see how I might be able to incorporate those techniques into my own work.
And then teaching the class was a little tiny part of it because then you had to put together an exhibit.
That's right.
And up to 3 pieces could be yours. And the rest had to be your students' work, which is fascinating. And here's the thing. The pieces had to be a minimum of 50 inches, 50 inches, which is a big commitment for a student.
It is. Throughout that time, I decided I wanted to have a particular challenge, a theme, and the theme is called Out on a Limb. And so for some of them, that Out on a Limb, it was the first time they'd ever made a quilt that big. I think almost all of them have not had a quilt in a national show before. So there was a lot of motivation.
Well, let's look at your quilts first. Now, first, let's look at the biker over here.
All right. So with that particular piece, actually, I have a photograph, and my technique often, I use that photograph to start with, though in all of my quilts that are in this exhibit are used and created by using that applique process. But the biker, it's called The Race, and it is a photograph of my son. At the time, he was 17, he's now 27, but he'd been in a duathlon. And I actually had originally made a quilt called the duathlon, and unfortunately was stolen out of a classroom 10 years ago. But this gave me the opportunity to say, what would I do 10 years later using different techniques? So I actually worked in more monochromatic. And I used some trapunto, never having done that before, but had taken a class in trapunto.
Okay.
So,
this is a stunning piece.
Oh, well, thank you. And actually for myself, I wanted to really push myself in relation to design. I use more representational work most of the time, but for me, I wanted to push. I decided by taking the simple line drawing of a single butterfly wing and then tessellating it, then working in that monochromatic field. So it's recognizable, but the idea that it's sort of taking off and, going into the abstract a bit.
It is just gorgeous. All right, tell me about this one.
Okay, this one is called Me and My Shadow, Out on a Limb. But I had been taking some photographs of myself. We were out in Arizona, took these long shadows and had this cool photo of a limb, of a manzanita tree out there. And so I started working with those and incorporated then some different techniques, used that wool felting.
Let's go take a look at some of the students' works.
All right, very good. This piece is by Marge Jorgensen, and she's from Cedarburg, Wisconsin. And so with Marge, again, she took that idea of that tree and just some ideas of reaching out and, hopes and dreams that she has, and she incorporated words onto the leaves of the tree. This piece is by Laura Krasinski, and she's from Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. And so she really wanted to use this photograph of her daughter, and it's called He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not. And it's their kitty cat, their Siamese kitty. Jessie is leaning against the tree, and I love the variety of fabrics that she included.
All right, we got another tree.
Okay, lots of trees. Jean Black from Plainfield, Illinois, created this one. She actually has incorporated a number of her watercolor techniques as well as her quilting techniques. So she used a variety of different pieces as she created insects and little birds. And
oh, but there's that great bird's nest.
Oh my gosh, yes, and it just is three-dimensionally falling off the quilt, but that mother bird is squawking at those babies and saying, you better get back into this nest right now. Wow.
All right, I'm getting a theme here. It's out on
It
a
is
limb.
out on a limb, and there are obviously a number of trees that were inspired by that theme. So Becky Grover from Ann Arbor, Michigan, created this piece. She used the image of her son peeking over the limb and then seeing the raccoons, and the squirrels peeking back at him, but not knowing about the fairies that were dancing around above him and such. But the name of the quilt is called Encounters, and just the very many things that that just might happen magically.
Now, this is absolutely adorable.
Isn't darling? This piece is by Heddys Stevenson, and she's from Canada. And it is her granddaughter, Fiona, climbing the tree. All along, I hadn't seen her work, and she kept saying, "Oh, I'm so nervous. I just don't know if I'm going to get it done. I don't think it's going to work out very well." And she hand-delivered it to me, and I unrolled it, and I just went, wow. There's three-dimensional leaves on it. There's a beaded spider web and dragonflies three-dimensionally off the body of the quilt. And she used the texture magic in the trunk of the tree and such. And again, it was just delightful to see how she portrayed Fiona.
All right, wait a minute. I'm
Yeah.
not seeing a tree limb here.
Well, they didn't have to use that tree limb. That
Right.
was not part of the requirement. And so with this one, with Barb, this photograph of her daughter, who now sent off to college this fall, but with her daughter 3 years old, and they were at the lake, her husband throwing her up in the air, and sort of that idea of leaping into the air away from her
Off she goes.
father's arms.
Okay, no tree here.
No tree here, but boy, you can start chuckling. And I did so when I was talking to Diane Dempsey, and she's from Madison, Wisconsin. And Diane said, "I have this idea, but I don't know how good it is." And such, she says, "I love making purses. And I thought about the idea, of course, that our arm is a limb. And what about hanging a purse off the arm?" She ended up having a photo shoot of her daughter and several of her friends to be able to get the photograph. But she loved embellishing the purses and all of that. So it was just so much fun to see.
It's a sassy quilt.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now this piece is by Linda Scott-Hoag, and she's from Janesville, Wisconsin. And a number of years ago, she was diagnosed with cancer, and so it's a particular quilt imagery that she wanted to be able to portray, to be able to kind of work herself through having gone through that cancer. She has this wonderful ribbon that the heart is hanging from, and so that's part of that out on the limb. And the name of this quilt is called Breast Therapy. And so there's sort of the darkness into the light, as she's portrayed, her process and her journey going through that cancer.
And she's healthy now.
She's healthy now, yes.
All right, one more quilt.
One more quilt of those 9 students. And this piece is by Karen Lee Carter, and she's from Virginia Beach, Virginia. Now, I actually met and have known Karen for over 20 years, and she was one of my very first students. She had the idea of doing a tree of life in sort of a Mexican feel, and she does extensive amount of three-dimensional work and included much of that. You worked with the texture magic, but many other techniques that she uses herself. But she now is doing some teaching in her area, but it was great.
Very nice exhibit.
Thank you.
Now, I think we're going to go find a nice spot with a table
right.
where you can show us a little bit of your technique and how you go about doing this.
Very
and then you can make a quilt. Show me this technique. Now, what's this little sample here?
All right. Well, this one, after I had finished my workshops and such last year, coming up with an idea, incorporating some of various texture ideas. And so there's texture magic in here. There was a folding and tucking technique that I had learned, and just doing some little three-dimensional flowers and then creating that all in a little piece.
Yeah.
But even as then I was preparing the class for this year to teach in Houston, I said, no one's going to get this done in a 3-hour class. So instead we worked with a really small little tree quilt.
And you're going to show us how to do the texture in that book.
Exactly. So actually with this texture magic,
Texture Magic?
It's actually a product that is out by Superior Threads, and it looks like just a piece of polyester, but you put it behind your fabric. So here I have it. It's here. It is behind here.
Okay, so this is what it
looks. Yeah, it looks a little bit like this. Very shiny, polyester looking, very slick. But you put it behind the fabric that you want to texturize, and you're going to do a lot of different stitching on it. You could do a little stippling stitch, and I did a whole bunch of different techniques to try to see how I might do it differently, but I liked the stippling stitch if I'm working fairly small. Stipple all over fairly closely together, giving a little sample of this on the back. But the next step, and you do need to work about 30% larger than your finished piece because you then hover the steam iron over the fabric and it shrinks up. It's just sort of like this caterpillar that just starts shrinking up, and it gives you just this greatest texture.
It does.
And
so
I
cool.
use some little prints in my fabrics, different things like that. So then once you've got your texturized fabric, you can do a variety of different things. And so I did this little applique tree and incorporated that on over the base of my picture image applique process background.
Okay. So what do you got down here?
So, and again, then I had just gone ahead as I was preparing that class, creating a pattern, and any of the different quilts that I do and the technique classes,
website?
and that's on my website. And then,
what's this?
Of course, my book. So it does go in quite a bit of detail, and there's probably 27 different quilts that are in this, but a lot of different tips and techniques. But it goes into great step-by-steps with 3 patterns on my picture image applique process.
Lots of fun.
It is. Great.
Well, let me tell you a little curve, because I like to ask, what's your philosophy of life?
That's not a little one, that's a big curve.
I know.
But it's really, okay. Well, I think for myself that I look at every single day as an adventure. You know, it's totally unknown from one day to the next. And I just like to see that adventure is sort of this journey that I'm on, and just not knowing what's going to happen, but excited to see what's going to happen the next day.
You're right. So, you never know.
You never know.
It's always a surprise.
Yes, it is.
Thank you so much for doing this and sharing your neat little technique. That's cool stuff.
It's fun. It is fun.
And thank you all for being here, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back next month to see what I have for you then. Thanks for being with me.